Hi, I'm Debbie Millman, and I host a podcast called Design Matters from the TED Audio Collective. Every episode, I have conversations with designers, writers, artists, and other luminaries of contemporary thought. People like Roman Mars, Ai Weiwei, Ethan Hawke, and Ashley Ford. Join us for an inquiry into the broader world of creative culture. Find and follow Design Matters with Debbie Millman wherever you're listening to this.
So manga has very long tentacles back to Japanese history. So some people say it starts in the 12th century with these hand scrolls, fantastic frolicking animals. Bandai Nagon is probably one of the more famous ones, when we're getting into the 13th century.
I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. Manga is surely one of the most beloved and influential types of culture in the world. And while there's long been a thriving international fandom around Japanese graphic novels, in the last 5 years in particular, there's been a huge surge of popular interest, with manga impossible to miss in bookshops and comic stores, and now in museums too. Specifically, I'm referring to the big exhibition Art of Manga at the De Young Museum in San Francisco, which is proving to be a real event. As the title suggests, the show looks at manga not just as a cultural phenomenon, but as visual art, digging into the history of the medium and celebrating its dynamic graphic and storytelling style. Specifically, Art of Manga focuses on 10 Japanese creators selected to show the breadth of what manga has been and can be. What is the connection of manga to Japanese art history? What does a museum have to add to the story of manga? And what can the popularity of manga, in turn, teach art museums? The show's curator, Nicole Coolidge Rousmaniere, agreed to talk to us about all of this. Nicole, thank you for joining me to talk about the art of manga.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, I'm very excited to talk to you about this show, but before we do, I want to talk a little bit about you, because I feel like you're a character in this show. Because I think people might wonder, how does one become a curator who specializes in manga?
And it's really true, because actually my specialty is, in a way, decorative arts, traditional Japanese arts, and all of that. But my passion has always been manga, and it's just something that I've loved. And I learned Japanese through manga. And whenever I've had the chance, I've displayed manga in any of my positions I've been in. And I was very lucky at the British Museum to be able to display manga in all sorts of different ways. And so, yes, it's become manga. But when I was very young, I went with my mother. We lived for a summer in France. 8 or something like that? And I fell in love with Tintin and Asterix and all of the bande dessinée and that kind of form. And I got
comic
hooked.
Form, yeah.
Graphic novel form. And I got hooked. And coming back, I did American comics, American graphic novels, which I love. I still love. But when I went to Japan, started going to Japan in my teens and early 20s, that was it.
And didn't you actually do manga connected to the British Museum, something like that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for recognizing that. That was really fantastic. The then director, Neil McGregor, I think maybe he knew that the Louvre were doing things with manga. And I was teaching in Japan at the time, but affiliated with the British Museum. And he said, can I find a manga artist to create a manga of the British Museum? And it took me about a year, but I love Hoshino Yukinobu. I just think his drawings are extraordinary. And it took me a year to get access to him and to get him to agree. And he did. And when I came back working at the British Museum, we brought him, and then I worked with him and Uchida Hiromi, and we worked to help him create Professor Munakata's British Museum Adventures.
Right.
It was fabulous.
And that sort of begot this exhibition in 2019 at the British Museum of Manga Art, which was a pretty big deal, yeah?
Yes, and there was one intermediary step. So that book came out in Japanese in 2010, and then in 2012, it came out in English through the British Museum Press. And then in 2015, I did an exhibition of 3 generations of manga artists, a small one at the British Museum free. 100,000 people came. It had a great reputation, and the British Museum said, well, why don't you pitch a large one? I don't know if they really knew that they were going to do it, but I pitched it, and eventually it went to kind of one of those services that check popular demand, whether this would be a popular exhibition or not, along with a number of other exhibitions they had. And it came in as number one. Although there was still a lot of trepidation about it, they kindly said, yeah, go for it. And they gave us the biggest space. And we did it relatively quickly, but it was a really fabulous historical look at manga. And it was a very British museum manga, meaning that it was about the social ramifications, production. It wasn't about the art. It was more about what is manga, why
the culture
manga.
and history of manga.
Yes.
Yeah. Did that show help beget this show in San Francisco?
Definitely. And just to mention with that show, it broke all sorts of records for the British Museum. I think that they were a little worried about it, but I think the worry evaporated. And what happened, and this is why it's coming to San Francisco, is that they saw a new demographic coming to the museum. Mm-hmm. So you get a whole range of particularly younger people, but all sorts from all different cultures, all different backgrounds. A large percent of the visitors had never been to the British Museum before. So that was a big surprise for the museum, something kind of wonderful. And it got the notice of Tom Campbell, who is the director here. And so he came out and visited it while I was there, and I took him through. And he said, well, can we have this exhibition in San Francisco? And that exhibition, it was such a slog to put it together, and and for all sorts of numbers of reasons. Plus, it had a lot of historical artworks that aren't manga, but gave the kind of history of manga that would have been hard to recreate. But I told him that if he really wanted it, I could make something special for the museum. This manga exhibition is a result of that.
So obviously for some people, the idea of a show about manga art is going to be an attraction like no other. For other people, it's going to be, I think, a totally alien object. So before we go any further, I just want you to define manga. Is it just Japanese comics and graphic novels? Is there something more specific than that stylistically that you're exploring with this show?
It's a graphic narrative form that tells stories through lines. So it's not just comics. In comics and bande dessinée and graphic novels, they're evolving and they're in a way becoming mangafied. What manga is more than that. It's a visual form that can be humorous, can also not be humorous, but it's telling content through images. So it's not relying on the text as much as the narrative flow. So why this is important is because our communications are going away. Just look at Instagram, away from text. Look at your podcast. What's happening is that information is being moved in a different form. And the thing about images, which you know probably more than I do, is that images come to a different part of your brain than text. And in general, it's received differently. And what manga does is it relays information through the composition, but also not just the panel composition, the page composition and the flow, but also through a series of grammar. There's a manga visual grammar. And so people can read manga incredibly quickly, much more so than reading any text, and absorb that information in a different way. And so what you're finding in Japan, for example, are companies creating manga of their company history. The government, school children are reading history in manga. Manga is becoming just the cultural communication, a form of visual cultural communication that is developed in Japan, but is now spreading throughout. And even Marvel is working with Kodansha to create manga-fied versions of Batman and the Joker and things like that. So we're seeing it bleeding out.
Sure. I mean, I think even the Vatican didn't launch its own little, anime or manga-inspired avatar. So really hard to deny the influence. Something I learned from the catalog is that the term manga means pictures run riot. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And that specific translation was from Tim Clark, who was a curator at the British Museum, who's really a wordsmith. And we were working together and he said, well, why don't you call it Pictures Run Riot? Which is true. He's a specialist on hokusai, and hokusai used that term.
Right,
so
right.
Hokusai created his hokusai manga, which he did draw it. It is his work, but it was created by his daughter and other people putting his drawings together and then reissued and reissued and reissued. But it was a huge hit. It's not got narrative. It is these kind of random sketches that evolved into what we know as manga today.
Right. Yes. That's one of the ways that the catalog makes the case for manga as an art, which is tracing it back to the history of Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock prints. People probably know the hokusai, the Great Wave, if they know one Japanese work of art. And I thought that was very interesting, actually, that the first use of the term manga is part of that history as related to hokusai.
What's really interesting is that manga has a visceral relationship, kind of a visual relationship with ukiyo-e, but more importantly, manga has a structural relationship.
Yes.
So the size of the prints, the way the process is done, the editors, the publishing houses, it is all taken from the Edo period, ukiyo-e, and transferred to modern
Yeah, very different, but there's like continuities in terms of the mass culture of visual storytelling from that period. I was even thinking, this is a bit of an aside, but I was thinking, because I recently saw a Hakusai show in Seattle, and even some of the stuff that people find a little, I don't know, racy or seedy about manga, the supernatural images, or even some of the sexy images. There's the very famous Hakusai image, the Dream of the Fisherman's Wife of a woman making love with an octopus. I was like, it's all in there within the sort of general Japanese artistic cultural milieu.
It is, and you have to understand with shunga, in general, Japanese kind of slightly racy images, then shunga weren't thought of as offsetting or anything to be prudish about, but they were viewed probably more in private circumstances, so there's a way of looking at things, maybe not on the wall of your of your house, but privately looking at them. And shunga, you have cheap shunga, of course, but you have really expensive, beautiful shunga. And in the same way with manga, you have beautiful, fabulous, fancy books, and then you have not so fancy books. There are racy manga and there's shunga-esque manga. We're not displaying those. And indeed, what's interesting is, while there was a boom of it for a while, I think that it's with the internet and way things are going, you see beautiful sexual depictions like shunga, but you don't see the seedy things as much because that's gone on to other forms. Interesting enough, the people who are drawing the standard sexual manga, 50% at least are women. We just need to revise what we think of as pornographic or not.
Well, before we get to the internet era, which is a whole story in itself, I know, with this art form, but I do want to give people a sense of the modern origins of manga, because it dates to the 19th century and ukiyo-e and all that. But in terms of the specific forms you were talking about, the narrative forms, that is a more recent 20th century origin, right? That you touch on in the show.
Exactly. And just to repeat myself, if you allow me to, so manga has very long tentacles back to Japanese history. So some people say it starts in the 12th century with these hand scrolls, fantastic frolicking animals. Bandai Nagon is probably one of the more famous ones, when we're getting into the 13th century, and we have these tales where you see manga-esque, you can see where the manga comes from, or maybe anime comes from. So you have that. And then you have these picture books that are very much like manga, Nara Ehon, 15th, 16th century, and then the ukiyo-e. So all of these things, you have things called yomihon, or reading books that hokusai everyone did, and they look like manga. And you start to get speech bubbles, in fact.
Really?
Yeah, in the early 20th century. But if we're really looking at the modern form of manga, there's two ways of defining it. And one is in the late 19th, early 20th century, because manga is a hybrid. It's not just pure Japanese. It's actually what Japan does in a way best, is taking all different types of inspirations, drawing it together, cooking it into something new. So while it's Japanese artistic histories and Japanese sensibilities, and one of those sensibilities, which is really important for manga, and I really want to emphasize that, is sound effects. So it's immersive. So you have onomatopoeia that are drawn into the images. It's not just the text. You actually feel
like visual representations of sound.
Exactly. So Japanese art, and it's really interesting, the word for art in Japan wasn't created until 1872 for the Vienna International Exposition. Before that, there are many different ways of terming art, normally about the medium, so painting or, ceramic or whatever. But oftentimes you could almost use the term kazari, and kazari means to decorate. And so it's about kind of the act of decoration. So when you see paintings, prints of Japanese birds and flowers, common theme. And even in manga, you'll see that. One bird will have the mouth open, the other bird will have the mouth closed. And what that means is that one bird is chirping to the other. And it's, in a sense, we're supposed to hear that chirping. It's an implied sound effect. So it's almost as if we're in that space. We're not just viewing it, we're feeling it, we're hearing it, we're sensing it. So that is incorporated into the whole kind of aesthetics. But what you get from 1860s onward is Yokohama and the birth of, the Western
opening of Japan,
influences, Chinese coming in. It's just internationalism. And at first, which was great for this form, is it was concentrated in these kind of ports that were open, and Yokohama was one of them. And because it was so small in a way, it was a boiling point for people all over the world. And you get artists coming there, you get printmakers, you have fantastic Bigot, you have all of these French, English, American, these artists coming there, and they create newspapers. I don't know if you know Punch.
The British humor satire magazine, yeah.
Exactly. Charles Bergman created Japan Punch, and he had comics, kind of proto-manga there. And manga comes out from the printing presses and that culture that we see that was boiling, starting in Yokohama. Japanese love news, have always loved news. Historically, news travels very fast in Japan. And you get Japanese roving manga reporters going to Europe, going to America. They're drawing the scenes. We have one artist named Kitazawa Rakuten, who's amazing, from Saitama, the early 20th century. He went to Europe. He went all over. He went to artist studios. He sketched them. And then
so really these are news reports in the form of manga?
Visual news reports in manga. Yep.
Wow. So what is the earliest thing in the show that you would call manga in the contemporary sense?
Well, we're not showing a history of manga because we did that in the British Museum. And in a way, you can buy a book and see the history.
See it all, yeah.
What we want to do is look at the art. And what was always surprised me in the British Museum was their prints and drawings in their study. I mean, it's fabulous. You see Leonardo da Vinci's sketches, and you see, Michelangelo's sketches, the disegno, and these fabulous designs. And Japanese manga artists do that. Like, they are drawing constantly. Hokusai did his sketches and he threw them out the window. His daughter would go and collect them. But he just didn't care. He just threw them out the window. She'd run, Oi, her name is, and she would sketch them, get them, and maybe sell them off or whatever. But we have a lot of hokusai because of her, collecting them. These manga artists, they're drawing every day. Their line quality is fabulous and beautiful. And you never actually see it because it's printed, and the printing processes even out the lines. They take away a little bit of that frisson of these designs. And so what we really wanted to do, because of the museum itself, the museum is really a beautiful fine art museum. I mean, it's just gorgeous, and they have high level shows. And so we wanted to really show manga as an art form. So we're looking at the drawings and the sketches and looking at that, and then the final product. Very little bit of the final product, that's at the end, that's at the shop, but that we're seeing that going through. And so we decided to start in the 1970s, where manga starts to become for everybody. 1960s are our oldest works, to the 1970s. So we get kind of an explosion. And this is what was happening throughout the world, but with the student unrest, with Vietnam, really this youth culture, it exploded. And manga, of course, the key word for manga is zeitgeist. Manga captures the period zeitgeist, whether that's in 1890, whether that's in 1970, whether that's in 2025, it is there. And so what we wanted to do is start in 1960s with that. And we have the most iconic manga image. I need to tell you about this.
Oh, please.
This is Tomorrow's Joe, and it's by Chiba Tetsuya. And Chiba Tetsuya is the kind of, he's still living. He's in his later 80s, and he's been awarded by the Japanese government all of these recent major awards, which is a big deal because manga was not taken seriously by people in Japan.
I was really surprised because he won the
Order of Culture.
Order of Culture, but just in 2024, yes. Which seems to me like very late because it seems to me such a big part of Japanese culture, but yeah, it seems late to be given the stamp of seriousness.
It's kind of shocking. but I'm happy they did it. He really is a star. But saying that, sometimes Japan might be slow to understand what they're doing brilliantly, until they get confirmation from the outside world, and then they embrace it. So including Hokusai. So now everyone loves Hokusai. He's on stamps, he's whatever. But when I was doing my PhD in art history, you didn't do it on ukiyo-e. It was in fine arts department. That was not considered art, at least in Japan. It was considered art by everybody else, but the art historians were a bit slow. And now Hokusai wave will go much more than, a national treasure screen, So it's an inversion of values, but the manga is now belatedly being recognized. And Chiba Sensei, who really is amazing, and he did this one manga, he did the drawings and the text was by Takamori Asao, but it's called Ashita no Jo, Fighting for Tomorrow. And it's basically Ashita no Jo means tomorrow's Joe. And what it is this poor, disenfranchised boy, orphan, rough and tumble. And when he's young, he's stealing food just to stay alive. He gets beaten up. He does bantam boxing. And of course, he's got a bit of attitude. So he gets thrown into reform school and he has to do more boxing to be able to stay alive. And he becomes a boxer and he finds someone who believes in him. So it's his struggle to stay alive, but it's all the world of boxing, and it's the late 60s to early 70s. And it's this insight into Japan. And it was used incredibly. It was used in the student rebellions in Japan. Every single Japanese national will know that manga. And the iconic scene is in Japanese manga and in most stories and long-running stories and in all of Japanese culture, it's not about winning. It's how you do it. It's the process. So a lot of manga, it's not the story even, it's you get involved in the characters. These characters become your pals. You live through them. You visit places with them. It's like you're almost your window to the outside world. And so we go through and see Joe's loves, Joe's getting beaten up, Joe's fights with different nationals and what happens. And then he has this one rival. And in the end, if it was an American comic or Marvel, I imagine he would win. But he doesn't. He loses. and the last scene of the manga is him slumped in his chair after he loses. And is he dead? He might be dead, but he's got a smile on his face. So he is happy with himself. It's okay, but he doesn't win.
Is that the famous image that you're talking about?
Yes. Oh. And it's amazing.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. It's a boxer slumped in the corner.
With a smile.
With a smile on his face. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you look at this picture, and if they look at the image, you'll see the whiteout, you'll see the rip. This has been a much loved, much used image. And what's important is you're never supposed to see it. You will never see this image. You will see a printed version of it that's tidied up. The lines will be all made solid. You won't get Chiba Sensei's light touch and the feeling of frisson, the exciting feeling that you get when you look at this. Print is great, and that's how it's meant to be. It's the end product for this. This is not the end product, but it's fabulous. It's this rare glimpse into the whole process that we're getting.
What are the challenges of showing this kind of art in a museum? Because these are narrative projects that come out of things that are on huge commercial print runs, but they come out of an artistic practice, and that's not always seen. So how are you thinking about this, of like the project of showing this kind of art and the kinds of things you want to spotlight about it as art?
We have 10 major artists. We actually have a few more, but 10 artists that we're showing and 8 that we're doing deep dives into. They're all fabulous artists, and these artists are all of incredibly high level for their drawing skills. So we chose them in part for that, but also their stories and for a number of different reasons. But some sell more than others. If we're talking about One Piece, of course.
The most famous, maybe one of the most famous published things ever.
Exactly. Almost as much as Harry Potter. But there's this one, Yamashita Kazumi. I mean, who has heard in America of Yamashita Kazumi? Well, her work has only been translated recently by Kodansha Online and then by Yen Press. That's just coming out now, although she's done it for many, many years. I'm going to show you this spread. In Western, you go from page to page. In Japan, it's the spread that's important. So this is a spread. It's called a mihiraki. So the right and the left make one composition.
I see. So spread, you mean like the whole composition. This is the image here for those listening is, a very dynamic image that's cut up along sort of light diagonals so that you get the sense of zooming in and out of an image as your eyes goes from right to left across the page.
Exactly. You see this poor little girl being a little bit frightened, being picked up by her kimono by a large bird. And then because it's the kimono, it drops. The baby is falling through the air. You see the baby's reflected in the bird's eye, and then the bird is reflected in the baby's eye, and the child is falling through the air. And you assume that the child is going to be killed. Spoiler alert, it's not. But you're reading it from right to left. You read from the baby's eye, then you go all the way down and you see the baby dropping. So it's this dynamic movement. And so you don't read down and across, you read diagonally.
You mentioned, seeing the page with the whiteout and the corrections on it. Are you showing only the original drawings in the show?
Yes, but saying that, some artists draw digitally. So we are showing those drawings, and we asked the artist which ones we should show and how. And so we worked with the artists. All of our artists draw analog, except for one. Some draw analog and digital, so we have a combination, but whenever possible, we try to get the analog, because what's going to happen is that almost all artists are going towards digital. So our timing is really good. This is an important moment in time, and the drawings are very fragile. You can't have them out very long, and in general, they never show them. So I want to get back to your original question, but I just want to show you one more image. This is Tagame Gengoroh. He's one of my favorites. This is from Our Colors, Manga Bokura no Shikisai. And it's this boy who is gay and he's in the process of coming out, but he finds relief through drawing and he becomes one with the colors. And you can see how he gets absorbed into the colors. I mean, it's pretty amazing, but this is all digital. This is a complete digital construction.
How do you show that in the show?
We get the printout, we do it to the right size, the manga sizes, we work with the artists, and then we worked also with the publisher, always, and then a DNP, Dai Nippon Insatsu, a manga publishing concern in Tokyo. They printed it out to manga standards. So that's how we're showing it.
So I'm curious, you mentioned the status of manga in Japan. Is this kind of show honoring the art of manga or the artists behind manga common in Japan?
In general, in Japan, like in the Edo period, publishers are very independent and don't work together. They call themselves Hammoto in the Edo period, and they still call themselves that same name. And so there's really competition between the publishers. So publishers don't, in general, move together. And so in Japan, if you have an exhibition of manga drawings, you will have it from one publisher or in general of just one artist. You don't tend to see anything that is collaborative across different publishers and such a diverse range of artists. In fact, I don't think this exhibition would have been thought about in Japan. And there have been some recent very good exhibitions, but in general, it's with one publisher or it's with one artist. And when they're collaborative, the couple of ones that have been, they're looking at a very specific theme. So manga in the 70s and 80s, they might say it's a little random, but I think that what we're doing is giving a very special insight into these different artists. And what I was frustrated about in the British Museum, this couldn't be helped, was we couldn't do a deep dive into any artists because we're showing over 50 artists, 100 and whatever, 80 titles. You can't show that much. Here we have 689 drawings. We have the luxury of actually showing some content, drilling in. But I want to just also explain that every publisher has different rules. They have different concerns. They have different standards. And this is really important. So I want this to be taken seriously. Piracy is a really big deal. And, you could say, well, who cares? People should care. It really is hurting the industry and it hurts the artist. So we have to be very careful about that and make sure that everything is made so that no one can just come in, snap in and make a t-shirt. But we've worked with the publishers and we've worked carefully and with all the different rules and approaching in different ways and working with the editors, sometimes with the rights departments, and sometimes indeed with the artist itself. For example, Chiba Tetsuya, going through his son, who is his manager. So there are many different ways of doing that. And that's why this exhibition has been quite a challenge, but it's also been a real privilege.
This is not my area of expertise. I have only ever read one manga series. There are a lot of new names for me in your show. I think that one of the figures that people might know best, we already mentioned, is Oda Eiichiro, who made One Piece, which has been adapted into an anime and a TV show and all kinds of other things, is maybe one of the longest running series, is one of the most published books in the world. And I know there's a special part of the show called How Manga is Made One Piece Only, dedicated to showing his process. So what is that? What do you learn from that?
What we have in our exhibition is we have all of these artists, but the last zone is dedicated to Oda Eiichiro, and we have One Piece. We show the drawings, and manga is black and white. Now, because of digital things, and a couple of artists go into color, but in general, manga is black and white. When you get color images, they're for covers or for special giveaways or for added a little bit free-zone content or something like that. What we have is 6 color images that Oda Eiichiro himself drew and colored in, and they are amazing. So it's worth it just to come for those. Like when you see it, it's just fantastic. They use all sorts of materials because it's not meant to be displayed. So they use Copic or they use all sorts of utensils, to do it. These colors are fugitive, so you have to be very careful when you display them. So they won't be displayed for all that long, but they will be displayed for the full 4 months. And when you leave that section, the very end of our exhibition is called Shueisha Manga Art Heritage. And what that is about is looking at, okay, it's not manga, but it's taking the manga genga, the original drawings for manga. They're the final drawings that get taken. They're almost like the artist's copyright. They get taken to the publishers, and that is what gets produced from the manga. They are the final one, and they're reproduced. And what's interesting is there's something else called a neimu. A neimu is a storyboard or sketch. And so we have those two. So those are the two kind of words that if you want to be in the know, those are the 2 words to know. And genga are the original drawings, and digital works can be genga. So there's not a separation between hand-drawn or drawn on a tablet. So those are the original drawings, and the ones on the tablet are also called original drawings. But what Shueisha Manga Art Heritage has done through this man, he's kind of one of these kind of creative geniuses. He's just kind of wacky inspiration, doing always interesting things. His name is Okamoto Masashi, but gets called Kimpachi. So I'll call him Kimpachi, which means golden one. He has blonde hair. He's just very visually literate. And what he's done is taken these high resolution images, with phase 1 cameras, takes amazing images and then reproduces them in different ways using collotype or using offset printing or using letterpress and on archival paper and also on washi, Japanese handmade paper, on different types of, he uses Gemund, German paper, all of these different types, kind of almost experimental. He makes them a bit larger and then experiments with the frames. He links it all to the blockchain. And then he star bond, and then he not to make NFTs, but to keep a kind of a provenance of the works. And then what he does is he uses Japanese traditional craft to either make the frames. So uses urushi lacquer, or he uses live wood structures or different things like that, and then sells them in lotteries or through the Shueisha Manga Art Heritage website. And in doing so, he got really interested in the processes. And so I went with him to the printing presses because he's been working in Shueisha so long. Unlike the editors, because he was part of the archival processes, he knew all of the old technologies and the digital side. So he reconstructed, for example, the old letterpresses and the whole techniques, and then he filmed them. And he started talking about the whole recreation of manga from early times to the present. And doing that, he decided to take one piece and create a small, bespoke, separate exhibition. So this is separate from our exhibition in the Herbst galleries. It's on the ground floor and it's free with a ticket to the exhibition, or it may be free at other points of the day. But it's about One Piece, but it's not really about One Piece. It's about how One Piece is printed. And it's amazing. And what he did, which is part of Kimpachi's genius, also the labor-intensive ability, is he, with his team, cut up all of the Kodansha One Piece works. And, how many volumes are there in One Piece? What, 110 more? And he cut out each page and he pasted them on large pieces of paper so you could actually visually read the entire manga on the wall. So from start to finish. And he did this in Japan, in Tachikawa, in this wonderful museum called the Play Museum. It's ostensibly for children, but it has round maze-like walls. And he covered the whole museum with this. And we took Tom Campbell and Krista Brugnara from the Young there, and they loved it and they wanted it back here. So we have an abbreviated version of it where you see One Piece chapter by chapter and you see the patterns. One manga grammar point is when you have a black frame in a manga, in a panel, that means it's the past or the history of it. So you have these kind of black frames that are periodically coming out, and you just see his overall kind of genius. But more importantly, then you have I think it's either in 4K or 8K, this incredible film that he did of the physical printing of the manga. You see the whole processes. Then he has these little treasure chests that are lit up, beautiful cases that look like kind of treasure cases, but very modern and clean. And he takes specific items that are used in the process of printing. And so you can have your individual and then smaller films throughout, giving all different types of angles of the printing. It is an experience.
Wow. So this is just like spinning off from manga into a whole kind of immersive universe of it as art and process and experience. That sounds quite extraordinary. If you were talking to a skeptic who said, why manga in the museum? Does this really belong here? How would you make the case for it?
Well, first of all, I'd say, why not? And then secondly, it's really important to understand that the world is moving on. And if we don't move on with it, it'll be our loss. This is an art form that speaks to people under 30, and it speaks to them in a deep way. So manga isn't just about an image, and we're not just putting images on the wall. This is people's identity. Younger people really care, and we need to understand why they care. What is it that draws them into this form, and why are they waiting with tender hooks for the next week for this One Piece chapter to drop? It almost feels like Shueisha's stock goes down if the One Piece chapter is delayed. It is such an important phenomenon. It's important for us to know, but it's also important for us to see Japanese art is really having a moment, and Japan is really having a moment. If you see, we're all in troubled times, aren't we, economically, but that hasn't dented Japanese travel. That hasn't dented the Americans going to Japan to see Japan. Why are they going? Well, a large part of it is Japanese aesthetics, Japanese art, Japanese experience. And manga is so integrated into all of that. You can't separate that. So if we're going to be showing ukiyo-e, we need to be showing manga. Also, it's important to know about what's happening in the present. To always look at the past doesn't really give us a glimpse. We're all self-editing. Obviously, we see the past through the present's eyes, but it's more important to understand the present and then go back into the past, and then we can review. So I would say to any skeptic, suspend disbelief. Suspending disbelief is number one. Come in. Maybe you might be skeptical for the first 2, 3 rooms. I think you'll start being engaged pretty quickly. And then I think you'll start to find yourself enjoying it. And what we're saying is you may not like every single artist. You may not like every single manga as you would in an artwork. But I think by the end, you're going to go into that gift shop and actually really think about it. Think about buying your first manga.
I feel like a lot of people get into manga through anime. That is such a huge industry. Does the show reflect that in any way?
First of all, in Japan, people first start with manga, then they go to anime, and then they might go to gaming. Well, Americans in general might go from gaming and anime to manga. So it's a reverse trajectory to Japan, but that doesn't make it any better or worse. Manga is the real thing. Manga is the source, and anime comes out of that. Not every single anime has had a manga, and sometimes, like Your Name, that gets famous as in anime, then gets a manga. Ghibli, they have Miyazaki Hayao, his Nausicaa. Nausicaa was first a anime, but he always wanted to make the manga. So then he made this amazing manga after Nausicaa. And if anyone hasn't read that manga, they absolutely need to. It's different from the anime, but anime is an experience and manga is different. Anime really kind of takes you into the flow, but manga, it's like almost a personalized experience. You are personally interacting with this. And what's important to know is while we're showing the Genga on these drawings on the wall, which will help you when you look at the manga because you will re-see the manga. You will get a glimpse of the manga that you won't have seen before if you just looked at the manga, or if you know the manga and you see the Genga, you will have a fresh experience. But the ultimate thing is that manga is held in your hands. Whether manga is a book or whether it's a tablet or whether it's your phone, it's you and that manga. It's that personalized experience. And so it's really important to understand that. And what we're giving you is another, and kind of, we're giving you the Holy Grail, the Rosetta Stone, to be able to translate what you have when you buy it.
Nicole, before I let you go, I have to ask you, what is the role of Beshi the Frog in this show?
Oh, and I'm wearing a Beshi t-shirt. Beshi is really important for us. In Japan, you always have mascots. K-Manga, which is a great digital delivery that Kodansha has made for manga. And they have their really cute mascots. You know, you always have a mascot. And then you have something in Japan called Yuru Kyara, which are kind of these like wacky, like little mascots that are really kind of goofy. They're kind of handmade and there's that aesthetic for that. Well, Beshi is a little different, but Beshi is our mascot. Beshi is a frog, but it's a naughty frog. Beshi has a bit of a personality. And Beshi is a avatar for Akatsuka Fujio, the most famous gag manga artist. Although he died a number of years ago, what's interesting is that you go into Tokyo subways and you'll still see his manga or still see his manga advertising for product. Everyone in Japan knows Akatsuka Fujio, and Beshi is one of his cuter, more interesting characters. In fact, it's almost a self-portrait. Beshi has a little mustache and a few hairs coming out. Akatsuka kind of has his personalized image of that. But two things I want to tell you about Beshi. First of all, the Beshis used for the museum are drawn by his assistant who worked with him when he was alive. He's an older man now, but he drew them for us. So they're authentic Beshis, but also two things that are very important. A frog in Japan, the term for frog is kairu, and that means frog, but it also means to return. So a lot of Japanese use images of frogs. They put them in their wallet. Shinto shrines to frogs, so money returns to you. You return safely. You have little amulets for cars with little frogs so that you won't get in a car accident. You return safely. So in a way, it's hopefully you'll return to this exhibition many times and enjoy it. But frogs are thought of as very interesting, important, auspicious animals. But the term Beshi, the word Beshi, in older Japanese and kind of more classical Japanese means should. So like Beshi would say, oh, you should come here, or ikubeshi, or you should do this, or you should come to the exhibition. And so Beshi is kind of like a salesman for the exhibition and a way to enjoy his goofy personality.
Well, I'm sure there are many, many people listening to this who are very eagerly awaiting this exhibition. I look forward to all the discourse and conversation it inspires. Thank you so much for talking to me about the art of manga.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor.
That is it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please do take a moment to rate and review The Art Angle. It helps other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili, with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Caroline Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening and see you next week.